daily news program from WorldLink TV presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
In new developments on the Iraqi crisis, diplomatic sources announced that the Security Council's scheduled voting session was postponed. In other developments, Russia reiterated that it will use its veto power against any new resolution that will permit the use of force against Iraq. Under the United Nations supervision, Iraq continues to destroy Al-Samud 2 missiles. Meanwhile, a number of volunteer human shields insist on staying in Iraq if a war breaks out. They also declared a state of international civil disobedience and a boycott of American products if the United States wage this war.
لم يختلف برنامج فرق التفتيش الدولي.
The itinerary of the United Nations inspection teams was not any different from their normal daily schedule for the past 3 months. As usual, they inspected a number of important Iraqi sites without giving prior notice to the Iraqi authorities, searching for any clues that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. The daily routine of Iraq's missile experts was the same as well. They continued to destroy Al-Samud 2 missiles at the Al-Taji base. The Iraqi authorities assert that they cooperated with the international inspectors. They sent a letter to the United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan objecting to the American and Kuwaiti authorities of opening a pathway in the barbed wire fence separating Iraq and Kuwait, since Baghdad feels that this is in preparation for an attack. The escalations of the threat of war did not prevent Buddhist priests from lighting a candle for peace, hoping that it would put out the flames of war. However, their presence in Baghdad raised questions. Are these last-minute efforts going to avert war?
We cannot lose hope, even up to the last minute.
The volunteer human shields held a press conference to clarify the reasons for a dispute over the locations they needed to be in the event of a bombing. However, they all agreed to remain in Iraq even if they had to face death. International public efforts are still ongoing. Peace groups are still coming to Baghdad, despite the group's knowledge that public efforts to convince Washington not to attack Iraq will not sway Washington. But these group leaders feel that they are honored just to put the effort, and that they are better than those who choose to remain silent in regards to an upcoming human catastrophe. Hisham Badawi, Abu Dhabi Television, Baghdad.
Well, the Turkish parliament has yet to decide whether to allow the use of its country for a war against Iraq. And Turkey made it known that such a move must meet its strategic goals.
American preparations in Turkey for the war appear progressing as planned, although without a place to settle their troops. Although the Turkish parliament may vote against a second resolution to admit the American troops, the United States is already helping to transfer Turkish troops to northern Iraq to join efforts in the war. Another indication for the military buildup is an agreement of American officials with the Turkish rail company to lease the rail cars for the transport of military equipment from transport ships in Alexandria to the Turkish-Iraqi border upon parliamentary approval.
her yönüyle takdir edilecektir.
Our President Erdogan's statement has made clear our united intention. His previous statement is a reiteration of Turkey's importance in the region. President Erdogan clarified his country's responsibilities from the point of view of security. He said that the representatives know very well that he will continue to discuss the issue with the foreign allies and is currently considering sending another resolution to the parliament.
الصحف التركية التي أشارت إلى أن طريق غازي عنتاب الخابور.
The Turkish papers have reported that the military movements in Tabur are one of the largest military movements in Turkish military history.
الاتجاه الجديد تحت شعار حماية.
As the president moves in a new direction to discuss plans with the Turkish Security Council, along with a sudden visit of a special American delegation to the Turkish parliament to make its case and convince the parliament to vote to join efforts towards the war.
البرلمان أو خارجه يغردون خارج السرب الرسمي للجماهير الرافضة.
The military is the top decision maker in Turkey. President Erdogan Khan is trying to convince the parliament to agree to join efforts against Iraq, while members of the parliament have previously refused. So will the parliament agree to joining the military efforts after the election? We will wait and see.
Information ministers of the Organization of Islamic Conference member states kicked off a two-day meeting in Cairo on Monday to discuss a unified plan of action to confront the grave threats facing the Islamic nation. President Hosni Mubarak, in his opening address delivered on his behalf by Prime Minister Atif Abeid, urged a common front in face of the current threats and to address the international community through level-headed arguments so as to correct misconceptions about Islam and Arabs. Russia vowed on Monday to veto a UN resolution seeking UN approval for war on Iraq. Russian Foreign Minister Igor Ivanov noted that if the US-British draft resolution, which he said includes unattainable ultimatums and demands will in the end be put to a vote, then Russia will use its veto against it. In the first direct reference to Russia's right to use a veto rather than abstain in the UN Security Council vote, Ivanov said the US and Britain had so far failed to justify their case against Baghdad. He added that they did not hear any serious arguments in favor of a military solution to the Iraqi problem in the course of the preceding session of the UN Security Council held last Friday. Ivanov also warned that Washington's efforts to topple Iraqi President Saddam Hussein and impose a US-based system of democracy on the country were doomed to failure. Meanwhile, the 15 members of the UN Security Council are due to meet to discuss Iraq and set a date to vote on the British-US-Spanish resolution giving Baghdad until March the 17th to disarm or face war. At present, the draft resolution is backed by the United States, Britain, Spain, and Bulgaria, while France, Russia, and China have said they will do their utmost to prevent the resolution going through. Non-permanent members Germany and Syria have come out against the proposed text, leaving 6 nations yet to state their voting intentions: Angola, Cameroon, Chile, Guinea, Mexico, and Pakistan. A majority of 9 members on the 15-member body needs to vote in favor for the resolution to pass, with no vetoes from the 5 permanent members. Monday's session is to convene amid US and British threats to strike Baghdad with or without Security Council endorsement. Amid frantic rounds of diplomatic shuttling ahead of the Security Council vote, France sent Foreign Minister Dominique de Villepin to rally opposition to the US motion among African Council members. De Villepin began a diplomatic push on Monday to persuade Africa's 3 Security Council, Angola, Cameroon, and Guinea, to support Paris' stance against war on Iraq. After talks with Cameroon President Paul Biya, de Villepin said France will not allow the UN Security Council to pass a resolution that would open the way to war in Iraq. On the second leg of his tour, the French Foreign Minister assured that Paris and Yaoundé shared the same concerns on the necessity of preserving the chances of peace and the unity of the UN Security Council. De Villepin had flown to Cameroon on Monday from Angola, where his counterpart said Luanda feels a war against Baghdad was inevitable and hinted Angola would abstain in the Security Council vote. For his part, de Villepin said war is still avoidable, insisting that there remained alternatives to war and stressing that UN weapons inspections were making progress in forcing Saddam Hussein to disarm. The French Foreign Minister is due to travel on to Guinea from Cameroon. De Villepin's tour coincides with a visit to the same 3 countries by a senior minister from Britain, a staunch backer of the United States' hardline stance on Iraq. Washington also intensified its diplomatic drive to win support for a new UN Security Council resolution on Iraq. State Department officials said Secretary of State Colin Powell called Angolan President José Eduardo dos Santos and Mexico's Foreign Minister on Monday before meeting in Washington with his Guinean counterpart. Powell, who also spoke twice on Sunday to Mexican Foreign Minister Derbez, was planning to call Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf ahead of his talks with Guinean Foreign Minister Francois Faure. Angola, Guinea, Mexico, and Pakistan are 4 of the 6 elected members of the Security Council who are as yet undecided on the US-British-Spanish proposed resolution. As the vote looms, Howe spoke numerous times with British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw and Spanish Foreign Minister Ana Palacio on Sunday and Monday to plot a strategy. President George W. Bush's administration has asked a small group of U.S. companies to bid on a contract to rebuild a post-war Iraq. A USAID spokeswoman said as part of its contingency planning for Iraq, the U.S. Agency for International Development solicited proposals for various goods and services, including the seaports and airports projects, schools, education, and health services. She declined to confirm the details of a Wall Street Journal report which said the contract could be worth up to $900 million.
Preparation for the US-led war against Iraq is underway, with frontal military bases being settled in southern Turkey and the Gulf region, while intensified influx of British soldiers and equipment are observed at the Kuwaiti ports. Meanwhile, leaders of the 2 main Kurdish parties have stated that they are prepared to jointly face any threat posed by anyone to the Kurdish people.
With war being very close to break out against Iraq and UNICOM personnel being evacuated from the demilitarized zone, fears of other conflicts to erupt are heightening, particularly between Turkey and the Kurds. On Sunday, leaders of the Union of Kurdistan and the Kurdish Democratic Parties held a meeting devoted to discussing ways of cooperation within the framework of a recently created joint command between them. At the news conference, both leaders stated they had reached new levels of cooperation in all areas and they were prepared to face jointly any threat posed by anyone to the Kurdish people. The Kurdish parties hold the position that Turkish troops should not enter Iraq territory under any circumstances in the event of war on Iraq.
We would like to have very good relations with Turkey. We like to solve all problems in friendly way. We are planning to send delegation to them. We had a continuous dialogue with them, and we hope that Turkey will respect the will of Iraqi opposition, which was explained in the final declaration that we don't prefer to have Turkish army here in Iraqi Kurdistan.
Meanwhile, in the Kurdish-controlled northern Iraq, bulldozers and trucks have been seen at work at a disused airfield. However, the United States has often refused to give answers about whether it has troops in the Kurdish areas, and officials in the Kurdistan Democratic Party have also denied knowledge of any U.S. military presence. In the meantime, Turkey continues to reinforce its troops and equipment on the Iraq border with the deployment of tanks, armored vehicles, artillery and supply convoys to its southern frontiers. Ankara plans to send tens of thousands of troops into northern Iraq in an attempt to secure the region in the event of war, fearing an uprising among the Kurds. In Kuwait, throughput at the ports is being pushed to the limits as US and British forces are unloading enough hardware to support an invasion to Iraq by more than 200,000 soldiers. In this context, some 28,000 British troops are being shipped into Kuwait at a rate of 1,500 a day, while the 3rd Infantry Division and the US Marine Corps have dispatched 140,000 troops there. More are expected, and demands at the port could be seriously tested if Washington deploys the 4th Infantry Division, and analysts say that unless port facilities can match demand, the mid-March ready-to-invade date could be pushed back. Meanwhile, the equipment of the 101st Airborne Division arrived as troops are having intensified live bullet training ahead of the war. The unit is the Army's only air assault unit and is part of the 100,000 troops in Kuwait and the more than 200,000 troops near Iraq.
And thousands of people gathered at Ba'abda Presidential Palace near Beirut on Sunday to show their support for the Syrian and Lebanese leaders' position against threats that face the region, while anti-war demonstrators worldwide continue protesting against possible US-led war against Iraq.
Waving Lebanese, Syrian, and Iraqi flags, thousands from various political parties took part in the Dignity and Loyalty March from Lebanon to Syria. They voiced their support for the Iraqi people and denounced U.S. war threats. The participants, including party leaders and legislators, were met by Lebanese President Emil Lahoud, who stressed the need for Arab solidarity. He said that events prove that coordination between Lebanon and Syria, prominently made apparent in Sharm el-Sheikh, rendered the two countries stronger in the international spectrums and more adherent to their people's expectations. In Pakistan, hundreds of thousands of people rallied in Rawalpindi on Sunday to protest a possible U.S. war on Iraq in a second of two anti-war demonstrations estimated by organizers of the Million Man Marches. The rally was organized by the Majlis al-Muttahida al-Amal, or United Action Forum.
Attacking Iraq is the announcement of U.S. death. In Afghanistan, the U.S. wants to run away, but we would like to tell them that Muslim nations will not leave them in peace in Iraq.
Security was tight, though organizers had pledged the rally would be peaceful. A war with Iraq is largely unpopular in Chile. Close to 5,000 Chileans marched down the streets in front of the Palace of the Foreign Ministry, decrying military action and calling for peace. Donning anti-war signs and burning U.S. flags, demonstrators demanded President Ricardo Lagos listen to the people and vote no for war in Iraq in the UN Security Council.
The people are telling President Ricardo Lagos that he cannot vote for a resolution that sets deadlines. Chile, as a member of the UN Security Council, has to vote against the war with a clear attitude. And only in that way would he be representing the Chilean people's will.
With Washington facing the possibility of being rebuffed in the United Nations over its determination to use force against Iraq, both UN National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice and Secretary of State Colin Powell spent Sunday morning trying to sell their case to the public via television talk shows. For Condoleezza Rice, it was no easy sell. She was greeted by noisy protests from anti-war demonstrators at both CBC and ABC. Meanwhile, 23 people were arrested Sunday as they crossed a police perimeter around Capitol Hill, where the U.S. Congress meets. The men and women arrested were part of a group of about 100 who peacefully marched up to the Capitol to pressure lawmakers to assert their power as legislators and prevent President Bush from proceeding with what they called an illegal war.
That this war is madness. Madness, it's immoral, it's unnecessary, it's against the Constitution, and we want it to stop.
British Prime Minister Tony Blair's unflinching support of the US President George W. Bush is posing the greatest ever challenge to his leadership. A leading cabinet minister threatened to resign if the government followed the United States into a war without UN authorization. 9 aides are also expected to follow suit. In Australia, the US second ally likewise is facing growing anti-war sentiments as it gave an Iraqi diplomat until Wednesday to depart the country.
British Prime Minister Tony Blair could face the biggest revolt the government would suffer since coming to power in 1997 if he orders British forces into war against Iraq without having secured a second resolution from the United Nations. An upward of 150 Labour lawmakers could rebel when Parliament next debates Iraq, and British newspapers tracked down 9 parliamentary private secretaries, PPSs, including 3 aides to cabinet ministers who indicated they might step down if Tony Blair supported a war in the absence of such a resolution. One of them, Labour politician Andrew Reid, subsequently said he was quitting his post as a PPS, apparently over the Iraqi crisis. Only hours later came the warning from International Development Secretary Claire Short. Short told BBC Radio late Sunday the whole atmosphere of the current situation is deeply reckless for undermining the UN, which the whole world needs for the future. Publicly, according to recent polls, Blair's popularity rating is steadily declining.
We're so busy with convincing the members of the Security Council. When will we start convincing the people on the street? Because we just saw in the poll that the majority of the people, like the normal people, won't agree with war without a second resolution.
Well, I'm here. I mean, you're not members of the Security Council, so I mean, I'm trying to have a dialogue the whole time with people about it, and I'm very happy to do that.
It's not really working, is it?
The anti-war drive in Australia and New Zealand, currently trading talks on war, is similarly flaring. Around 700 anti-war protesters gathered outside New Zealand's parliament Monday, branding Australian Prime Minister John Howard a warmonger. The protesters, who included 3 Green Party MPs, also hurled tomatoes onto the steps of the parliament building in a show of anger over Howard's unstinting support for US-led war against Iraq. A Sunday Star Times poll of 500 people conducted on the eve of Howard's visit showed 54% of New Zealanders believe Howard is wrong to back a US-led war on Iraq, and 71% say New Zealand should not follow suit. Meanwhile, Australia acknowledged that it ordered the expulsion of an Iraqi diplomat for alleged spying after receiving a request from the United States to take action against Baghdad's envoys. Opposition leaders charged that the expulsion of Hilal Ibrahim Arif was timed to provide Howard with fresh evidence of alleged Iraqi wrongdoing ahead of his expected announcement Thursday that Australia will commit troops to a US-led war against Iraq.
Thousands of Lebanese, Palestinian and Arab people living in Lebanon came to Damascus today and took to the streets in a massive march, expressing high appreciation of President Bashar al-Assad's firm and principled stance. More in this report.
Damascus witnessed today a massive demonstration that came from Lebanon to express appreciation of the pan-Arab stand voiced by President Bashar al-Assad in the speech he addressed at Sharm el-Sheikh summit. Upon their arrival to Damascus, thousands of demonstrators took to the streets of Damascus and gathered near the Hospitality Palace. The demonstrators shouted slogans speaking highly of the firm stance of Syria led by President Bashar al-Assad and the president's embodiment of the Arab masses' objectives and aspirations. As the demonstrators were passing near the Republican Palace, President al-Assad greeted the demonstrators. President al-Assad received the organizing committee in the presence of Assistant Secretary General of the Ba'ath Arab Socialist Party, Dr. Salman Qaddah, and Minister of Information, Mr. Adnan Omran. The President welcomed members of the committee, thanked them for the efforts they exerted, and asked them to convey his greetings to all the participants in the demonstration. President al-Assad referred to the support of Syria and Lebanon to each other and to the pan-Arab causes under all circumstances. He stressed that Syria would always take stands in defense of the Arab interests and would continue to exert efforts in defense of these interests. Earlier, the representative of President al-Assad, Dr. Qaddah, addressed the demonstration in which he conveyed the greetings of President al-Assad and Syrian people to the guests. He affirmed Syria's principled stance in defense of the pan-Arab causes, pointing out that these stands were clearly manifested during the speech delivered by President Bashar al-Assad during Sharm el-Sheikh summit. Mr. Qaddah referred to the unity of destiny of Syria and Lebanon and their unwavering stances towards all Arab causes of destiny. Lebanese Member of Parliament Qabalan Isa delivered a speech in which he emphasized that the demonstration is a truthful expression of the Lebanese people's will and the strategic unity between the two states. Other speeches highlighted the foresight of President Bashar al-Assad and his utter rejection to compromise at the expense of Arab rights. They praised the President's stand at Sharm el-Sheikh summit and his emphasis on the necessity of abstaining from giving facilitations to strike Iraq. Before leaving for Damascus, the demonstrators gathered in Beirut near Babda Palace, expressing high appreciation of the stands of Presidents Bashar al-Assad and Emil Lahoud in defense of Arab causes. President Lahoud greeted the demonstrators and received a delegation representing them. President Lahoud referred to the strategic stance of Syria and Lebanon, stressing that the Syrian-Lebanese distinguished relations are an example to be followed by other Arab states on the path of pan-Arab solidarity and integration. He said that the demonstration is an expression of the strategic cohesion between Syria and Lebanon, whose foundations were laid thanks to the transparent vision of the late President Hafez al-Assad, pointing out that this vision is still continuous under the leadership of President Bashar al-Assad.
citizen Ribhi Abeid, 48 years old, was killed today when an Israeli landmine blew up in the village of Faraon near Tulkarm. Abeid was herding his sheep when the landmine blew up the toe and tore apart his body, leading to his martyrdom on the spot. The Central Council continued its meeting this morning at the presidential premises in Ramallah City to follow up discussions on the current political situation and to approve the creation of a prime minister post to the PNA. President Arafat took part in the meeting yesterday, in which more than 100 members of the PLO factions took part. Members of the PLO Executive Committee announced their agreement on the appointment of Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen to the premier post in line with the proposed political reform to build the PNA's bodies. President Arafat called on members of the Central Council to accept this proposal. Israeli occupation forces shot dead a Palestinian civilian late on Saturday north of Gaza Strip, while a second one died of wounds he sustained after being shot during the Israeli invasion of the refugee camp of Jabalia 3 days ago. Saeed Al-Defi, 23 years old, from Jabalia refugee camp, was shot dead with a number of live bullets in the head, Palestinian medical sources said. Security sources said Israeli tanks stationed at the new post near the city of Sheikh Zayed, northern Gaza Strip, opened fire at a group of Palestinian passers-by, killing one and injured more than 5. In the city of Khan Yunis, south of Gaza Strip, child Ahmad Al-Agha, 8 years old, was moderately injured when Israeli occupation troops stationed at Ganital settlement opened heavy machine guns and shells. As well in Rafah, a 12 years old child, Yahya Al-Rishawi, was shot and injured as Israeli occupation tanks bombed this morning the Palestinian houses using their heavy machine guns. Meanwhile, Israeli occupation bulldozers demolished today 2 Palestinian homes in Hebron city owned for Hazem Al-Qawasmi and Mahmoud Al-Qawasmi. Earlier this morning, the Israeli tanks invaded the town of Qabatia near Jenin and arrested Muhammad Abu Rub and destroyed his home. The Palestinian Directorate of Civil Defense in Gaza appealed to all relative international bodies and health organizations to immediately intervene to halt the non-stop Israeli assaults on the Palestinian firefighters and medics, as well as the ambulances while performing their humanitarian duties. This urgent appeal was forwarded to World Organization for Civil Defense in Geneva, as well as the Civil Defense of the European Partnership in Rome, to brief them on the Israeli escalated offensives targeting the rescue workers while on a humanitarian duty. The latest was the indiscriminate killing of Naji Ismail Abu Jalila, whose fatal death broadcasted on the TV when the Israeli occupation forces fired flat shell at the firefighters and a group of civilians attempting to help in putting out the blaze in a building. Moreover, 2 rescuers were injured in Jabalia refugee camp north of Gaza Strip 3 days ago. The Palestinian Center for Human Rights asserted in a report issued today that the Israeli escalation against the Palestinian people is carried out under the complete silence of the international community and the preoccupation of the Arab and international mass media with the probable war against Iraq. In the report, the center said that the Israeli occupation troops' crimes reached the extreme degree of state terrorism, expressing deep concern of the Israeli escalation in the Palestinian territories and the incidents in Gaza Strip during the last months, and tens of martyrs who were targeted by Israeli war machine. The center called on the international community to get out of its silence and intervene promptly for halting these Israeli criminal assaults in the Palestinian territories.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support provided by Henry and Virgilia Dakin.